Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to introduce the SGS webinar for certification of devices into the UK market, tackling a whirlwind of uncertainties, UK medical devices market access. My name is Gregory Jacobson. I'm the Sales Director for SGS North America Medical Division. Your speaker today is Balazs Bosic. Balazs is one of our technical directors for medical devices in the US. A bit about SGS. SGS is the world's leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification company. We have over 98,000 employees in over 2,650 locations around the world and expertise across 7 global industry sectors. We provide assistance and expertise with global support and services that cater to all industries. We are the largest provider of audits, certification, training, and advisory services. We have the ability to turn your needs into comprehensive solutions, and with a consistent service delivery via our worldwide network and global footprint. We have highly experienced quality and regulatory experts in the medical device certification area, ready to offer training to you from our SGS Academy. An email will be sent later with a link to this recording and a copy of this presentation. There will be Q&A at the end, so please put all your questions in the chat box so we can discuss them at the end of the presentation. There will be a survey on your screen. Please fill it out at the end. Thank you for joining us today. To start, I will turn it over to Balazs.
Thank you, Greg. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about the context and how we got to where we are today with the UK regulatory framework. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going behind the scenes, what the UK government is doing. There's a lot going on there, and that way I hope that you will have some information on how to best tackle and prepare your regulatory strategy. And then we are going to look at some of the comparisons with the EU regulatory framework to see where the similarities are, where the differences are, and not only where they are today, but also how they are heading in a similar or different direction. And then we are going to take or offer actual maybe playbooks or scenarios of how manufacturers in different situation or with different status of products can have the best possible strategy. So after Brexit, what have we got and how we got there? So at the moment, in the UK, they have what they call a European standstill until June of 2025, which means that they are currently accepting all CE marked products on the UK market. So if you currently have products that are legally CE marked under MDD or MDR, you can sell those products in the UK. You don't need the UKCA mark just yet. We have updated transition times for the CE marking and UKCA marking. I'm going to show you the infographics in a later slide. The UK was doing, so following Brexit, the UK got a lot of feedback, and they were really just reassessing their own position in all different contexts. So basically they wanted to find out their own relative position as a country, as a government, as a player in the world medical device industry, or stakeholder in the world medical device industry. So the UK government and the various stakeholders in the UK really tried to make the best out of the situation, because of course UK objectively lost a bunch of things in Brexit, and but they really tried to make a situation where they assess their position and they try to maybe reframe it in a way that turns it into a freedom and to be free from some of the boundaries and constraints from the European Union, and see, okay, if we are no longer bound by common, legal frameworks, what can we do with this freedom? Can we come up with a position and a situation that maybe creates a little bit of an edge over what's going on in Europe. So they had multiple rounds of consultation processes. They have been provided with feedback from various expert groups, for example, the Life Science Council. And I have put in, once we're done with this session today, and you will get the slide deck, you can follow up on these links. It provides you with these position papers and consultation papers. So if you're interested in some of the details in more detail, then you can follow up and read about them more. Also, as I said, the government was provoked, and the public was actually demanding that the UK is severing ties to all those boundaries and constraints that the population did not find beneficial, or it found too constraining. And they applied pressure on the UK government to get rid of all these contracts or legal obligations. So basically Brexit was not just like a one-time flame, but it really expressed, it seems like, people's need that they wanted the UK to regain control over how they drive their own regulatory framework and legal schemes. And with that came that the UK wanted to open up and increase their awareness to international standing. So look beyond just being part of the EU or being part of the European continent. They looked at different collaborations that were already ongoing as part of the EU, but in some cases they were not the leading voice in those discussions. So for example, when the MDSAP Regulatory Authority Council was working with the European Union, UK and Ireland were very big proponents on the EU joining MDSAP as a country or as a jurisdiction, but some other leading industry experts from Europe were very much against, or governmental bodies were very much against this, and the UK was outvoted. So now was the time after Brexit for the UK to dust off these relationships and basically retighten the collaboration with all these bodies that they found beneficial. Also, of course, in Europe, there's many criticism against the MDR and IVDR that they have, the pendulum has overswung and the controls are too tight. And then the UK reassess themselves. Can they do one better? Can they come up with a regulatory framework that is not as tightly controlled or not as restrictive as the European one? And they reassessed all the different bits and pieces, and they try to do an impact assessment of what are the beneficial parts of the EU MDR and what are the ones that can be maybe lifted or loosened a little bit without sacrificing safety of the patients or safety of the population in general. And overall, they have a bunch of desires expressed in innovation, international relationships, and capacity. And I'm going to talk about these different aspects separately. So one of the big impact assessment came from a report that was titled Pro-Innovation Regulation of Technologies Review. And this was named colloquially as a McLean Review after the name of the author, Angela McLean, who's the government chief scientific advisor. And this was published in this May. And again, there's a link there for the original document. And overall, it summarized and offered 8 innovative technology recommendations covering the capacity. So for example, collaboration across government agencies, the Centers for Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation, which was already a thing, but it needs to, the innovation needs to be maybe refocused and continued. And also they want to basically tighten the collaboration between the different stakeholders, meaning government and industry and maybe some lobby groups and some other parties for a closer collaboration. So in that way, or one of the instruments that they came up with was two-way secondments between the MHRA, which is the UK regulatory authority, and the industry. It was in alignment with the government's reform declaration. And they also want to have closer ties between the MHRA and the conformity assessment bodies, including SGS. So we are also, our UK office, SGS UK, is also in close collaboration with the MHRA. And then on the, and then these hopefully will take off some workload from the UK government so that they have enough capacity to work on the conformity assessments, to work on the product approvals. So they want to have a better outcome than what is currently going on in continental Europe. On the innovation side, they have came up with a new program, which is called an Innovative Device Access Pathway, IDAP, and the pilot started just very recently. You can read more about the program under the link. So it's basically for all those devices, novel devices, which offer solutions to unmet needs in the UK government. And then you can look up, there's interactive maps available. I don't have a link to that one, but if you search for it, you will be able to find about waiting lists for different procedures in given UK hospitals. And so if your device happens to be a device that fills some of these unmet needs, but is not yet even CE marked or doesn't have a UKCA mark, you may tender your product to to participate in this IDAP program. And the government may help you with different things like, finish up your research and development, finish up the clinical investigation, help you with the conformity assessment process. So they can lend you not only just financial support, but actual knowledge and competence support as well to get these products to the UK market as quick as possible. In many cases, the goal is to make it way faster than the CE marking process under the MDR. They are also learning from a previous program that they had, which was called ILAP, the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway. So that's going on for, I think, 2 years now. And they already had some takeaways from that, and they are rolling that knowledge into their innovation roadmap. Also, as in their position or their view as a globally aware government, now the UK government is doing what they call a horizon scanning for different products and regulations of anything that would be desirable for the UK. So if there's a cool product in some other jurisdiction that is not available in the UK, they may want to contact those manufacturers and somehow entice them to provide some rewards for those products to be present in the UK market. Also, if they see some good practices from any of the regulations anywhere in the world, they will want to keep an open eye and open mind. And even if they see that a given regulatory framework is so good that they would trust that, then they may even accept that market approval, and those devices can directly be put on the UK market. So they are really trying to remove the obstacles from products entering the UK market. Basically, that's the short of it. You can see in the report, there's a little bit of an excerpt from this diagram that shows how the different organizational entities are collaborating in the whole life cycle of the medical devices. So all the way from early stage discovery and research to regulatory approvals, including clinical trials and investigations, to cost effectiveness approaches, procurement, and the whole thing, of course, works into their national reimbursement program, for example. So they try to really integrate all these systems and get these different bodies to collaborate and coordinate their activities so that the redundancies and roadblocks are eliminated. So they are really serious about it. It seems like they are moving really fast in this regard, but not much is yet visible. So that's why in the previous slide I called this a regulatory standstill because not much is visible to the external public just yet, unless you are participating in some of these programs directly. So after all these inputs, I already mentioned that the UK is involved in IMDRF activities, including MDSAP, so they are big proponents. I just spoke with some, unofficially, I just spoke with some FDA folks last week, and they confirmed to me that the MDSAP RAC would not be against considering the UK as a jurisdiction on its own, even if they cannot get the whole Europe to sign up, because that would be very desirable for MDSAP, but they would even consider the UK on its own to participate and become either a full member of MDSAP or some high level of collaboration where the MDSAP reports could be directly used for UK auditing and market approval purposes as well. So obviously this is just in a very early tentative talks, but just to give you a little bit of a tangible feel of what this collaboration can mean. They have also, the UK government recognized system-wide capacity issues as everyone and all the governments. So this was, of course, the birth of the MDSAP as well, because the participating regulators also noticed capacity issues, and basically they outsourced the auditing portion of their work to the MDSAP auditing organizations. And then the McLean review, as I showed, had some proposals, and so they are now working on implementing those proposed actions. There's a government policy shifts towards recognition and reliance of other market approvals. So basically, it is not only going to be a necessity or a transitional artifact to accept the CE marking, but the UK government, similar to other governments like in the past, for example, Saudi Arabia and some other countries, said that we are alone, maybe too small to be attractive or to be able to enforce or even have the need to create our own market access process and conformity assessment process. But we are happy to accept market approval from a jurisdiction that is considered trustworthy and high quality, like the EU, like the US, like some other developed countries, and they would just simply accept and recognize those market approvals, again, to accelerate products reaching the UK market. They are doing a preparation for that are ongoing for a new consultation in this year's October and November. And there are a couple of practical activities like cooperation across stakeholders, plugging the gaps with recognition. There's some activities that they are doing to increase the capacity within UK. They have the innovation pathways, as I already mentioned, IDEP, horizon scanning, innovation office and scientific advices, and then they do the international cooperation. So really the UK government opened up itself to the whole globe, removing the shackles from the EU. The work stream is basically, as I mentioned, it has 10 main items under 3 bigger groups on how, what, and when to deliver. So under the innovation, they are doing ambitious routes for innovative health tech, including but not limited to IDEP. For the international collaboration, they have domestic assurance rules that will allow recognition of approvals under trusted jurisdictions, for example, the FDA, and immediately release capacity constraints. And they also have some tangible solutions to the ongoing regulatory system capacity challenges. So that's what they are working on. There are a couple of other updates, and this some of you may have already seen some of this content or are aware of this content. So the consultation is just one more link to the original consultation document, so that you can see what are the ongoing topic that the UK government is tackling. The MHRA guidance is based on their webpage, so it's important to point out this is just a formal or formatting question, that while guidance is maybe in Europe and some other jurisdictions are published as PDF files, you can download it from the website. and then you have a much clearer picture of when these documents are updated. The UK stores this information as websites, so they are not in distinct documents, but in websites in many cases. I have been assured by some people in the know that at the bottom of each page there is a clear revision history, so you can double check what is the current revision, and regardless that it's not a new PDF document, when you visit these pages you can check when this document or when the page content has been updated, and then from that you can treat it almost like a distinct document, and you can, for example, print it in a PDF, and then you can still, for the purpose of your external control document in your QMS, you can rely on these documents and you can clearly see the different versions. I already mentioned that SGS approved body is engaged with the MHRA to support them with development of guidance on key topics. The UK government plans to issue the first stage of the new regulations. So, of course, the current UK regulations are from 2002, maybe has been slightly amended since then, but it is largely based on the MDD. And now they are working on a new set of regulations, which, of course, no big surprise, will largely model the MDR. But as I said, they want to learn from the mistakes and want to learn from those areas that have been maybe over-regulated or are counterproductive or stifles innovation, and they want to do one better. And so they are going to deviate from the MDR in certain cases. But it's if you are going to build an MDR technical documentation, generally speaking, a big portion of that will be directly usable for the UK regulatory process as well. I'm going to show you a comparison table of some of the main items of what is the idea of the UK government, where they want to deviate and when they want to just align their approach with the EU MDR. But just like we have seen in the MDR Article 120, where the MDR was gradually rolled out and it wasn't all at once, but for the MDD certified manufacturers or manufacturers who had an MDD CE mark product, there were some processes that were already applicable from the MDR even before the MDR conformity assessment of their products was done. So, for example, some post-market activities, vigilance cases, vigilance process, those processes and that approach seems to be similar of what the UK is doing now, because they also have rolled out that, for example, the post-market surveillance will need to be aligned to the UK framework sooner than the general rollout. And I'm going to show the general timelines, but for example, the post-market surveillance will be mandatory sooner, and they even have their own reporting platform. For the time being, you can use the European vigilance forms and guidelines, which is explicitly referenced from the UK regulations, but they already have set up a new database for reporting, and after a while it will be mandatory to report through that database. So this process will need to be adopted earlier than whatever is coming up next. And so I'm going to show you some timelines of what is foreseen as the legislation comes to effect, and how they are finalizing the document and how they are consulting with the different stakeholders. In June, the UK regulations were amended to extend the time frame. I'm going to show you the timelines for that, and it is published, so you can download these infographics as well. And in July, the MHRA sent an email to the stakeholder that describes the changes. You can also download that under this link. So this is a small version, and the point here is not to immediately see, but you can download these infographics for yourself, and then you can see that for your classes of device, what are the different milestones or what are the different transition timelines that have now been extended. So basically, for medical devices, the extension is largely aligned with the MDD validity extension. So you can see that for certain high-risk devices, the acceptance of the CE marking in the UK is 31st of December 2027, just like it is in Europe. And for lower class devices, it's actually June of 2028. So it's like half a year earlier than the NDD validity extension. But generally speaking, it's the same. And for self-declared devices, it can be accepted all the way up until 2030. So, and you get a similar infographics for IVD devices as well. I'm not going to go into details here, but you have a couple of years until which the CE marking is still accepted. And of course, after that, the type of CE marking will also depend on what regulation or directive is that CE mark placed on the devices. So beyond this point and up until 2030, only the MDR-based or IVDR-based CE marking is acceptable. And the current thinking is that the UKCA mark will only be mandatory after 2030 in both cases. Of course, we have to mention, and this is a little bit of a gossip, but it's basically very, like the current stance is official. What we take away from this may depend. So the current situation is that this timeline, the 2030 acceptance for CE marking, is only for medical devices across all the product groups that are CE marked in Europe. So anything from personal safety equipment or anything else. For those devices, the current regulation is that they will forever accept the CE marking. The only current exemption where there is a timeline for transferring into UKCA is medical devices. And of course, some people already speculate that eventually they may lift this and they may say that, okay, we will forever accept the CE marking, but of course we cannot gamble on that. So for the time being, we just understand that this is the current situation. So, but it's maybe worth to follow that discussion as well. Eventually, maybe they will completely get rid of mandatory UKCA marking, and that of course can have an impact on your regulatory strategy. So there's a couple of new items coming up, and it's on a timeline here. So in the beginning of next year, there's going to be PMS, post-market surveillance obligations will be submitted to the Parliament to make mandatory for the manufacturers. By November of next year, there's going to be a new Northern Ireland IVD legislation. By December of next year, there's going to be part 1 of the new UK MDR. As I said, it's going to be split into different parts. So if you are looking at the different portions, so part 1 is going to regulate the definitions, classification, economic operators, approved bodies, environmental and sustainability requirements, and these will be submitted for approval at that time. But likely it will come into force by the summer of 2025. And 6 months later, the second part of the new UK MDR will be discussed with the Parliament, and the approval process will start. And the second part will cover certain items like health institution exemptions, essential requirements, technical documentation requirements, quality management, UDI, distance sales, clinical investigations, performance evaluations, registrations, and transitional agreements or arrangements. That's going to be the full scope of the new UK MDR. So it's going to come in 2 parts. When we talked about that the whole legislation procedure is similarly complex, maybe not as much, but has many steps, just like it was for the MDR. Maybe some of you remember that the word trilogue almost became a meme because it was so overused. It was so like dominating the discussion for so long during the MDR legislation process that it was well known. And so in this case also the MHRA needs to consult with various stakeholders. So they're going to have a consultation process with the World Trade Organization, the UK Parliament. Then they will need to have a cooling cooling off period where people can basically digest and can submit complaints or objections to the upcoming legislation, and then the potential application will is also listed here for the different milestones. So we are currently in the standstill, and then it will be, it may be extended, this whole transition period, and it may be extended further. And then, as I said, the first part is the post-market surveillance, which they want to roll out ahead of time. And then, as I said, next year, there's going to be the Northern Ireland registration, the legislation, and then the general regulations will come in two parts, and you can see the respective dates there. The recognitions, we don't even have any tentative dates yet. So this is obviously all preliminary, subject to change, but this is the closest that we have in terms of any currently published timelines. So that, again, may inform your regulatory strategy of how you want to adopt or how you want to align your internal activities. So additional, maybe smaller scale regulatory updates. From the technical side of, even if you want to apply or if you want to go for your UKCA conformity assessment, there are certain things that you have to know. Obviously, the baseline is always the MDD and the MDD related guidelines. So all the MedDev guidelines are typically still accepted in the UK unless otherwise explicitly regulated. So one piece of the puzzle of the MDR is the common specifications, and in the UK there are still no common specification published, so that might be a hindrance for them to roll out the MDR, because it was also a missing piece for the European MDR. So it seems to be also the case in the UK. Until replaced by MHRA specific guidance, the UK MDR 2002 still relies on the use of EU MedDev guidance documents and NBOG guidance where appropriate. So just feel free to continue using those. If manufacturers have any questions or challenges in the validity of EU guidance in the UK, then you should contact the MHRA, who will be happy to address any concerns. So obviously, because these guidelines were written to the EU MDD, they may have some content that does not fit into the current UK regulatory framework. So if you find any contradiction or anything that requires clarification or any special rules to apply those guidelines under the UK MDR, then please reach out to the MHRA directly, and they will collect that feedback and they will try to answer those as best as they can. Instead of the EU harmonized standards, in the UK you have designated standards, and the list is published on the UK government website. Here's the link. And as of October, there have been no new designated standards for general medical devices or IVD since 2021. So the designated and harmonized standards are still largely aligned, but some new EU harmonized standards are beginning to create a misalignment. Manufacturers should be evaluating and addressing the differences. So again, just because your current product is MDD compliant, it does not mean that it will automatically fly through the UKCA conformity assessment. You should already start to very deliberately and explicitly address the UK requirement. And if you find that your current QMS or MDD technical documentation parts comply with the UK MDR, good. But if not, then you will be required by the UK approved body to show explicit compliance to the UK MDR. So just because you have an MDD based technical documentation, it will not be an automatic free pass to get your UKCA certification. It will accelerate the process and you can leverage a lot of pieces, but you should be very clear that there already might be some differences and you will need to address and justify those differences. So I mentioned previously that the UK government made an impact assessment and published their position about how they want to drive and how they want to align their approach with Europe and how they want to be different, and some maybe justification also why they want to do it similarly or differently. So this slide and the next are going to talk about that. So basically, they want to extend the scope to include products without intended medical purpose. It's going to be aligned with the EU MDR classification rules updated. It will be aligned, but interpretations might diverge. For example, software might follow slightly different classification rules than under the EU MDR. My information is that it's still going to be IMDRF based. So the guidance that we have for software classification, it was also based on the IMDRF document. So there will be a large amount of alignment, hopefully, but there might be some slight smaller interpretation for the MHRA. The UK responsible person, UKRP, are required for manufacturer outside UK. This is largely aligned with the EU authorized representative. A qualified person is required for manufacturers and UK responsible persons. It will largely align with the PRRC, but the qualification for the qualified person is not defined yet. They're going to have a more stringent clinical evidence requirements. It will be similar to the EU, but MHRA states that the approach to equivalence will take us beyond the equivalence requirements in the EU. So it's a question mark whether they talk about the MDR based and whatever is explained in the GMCD guidance documents, or whether this is something that talks about the MDD documents. So in any case, you should keep this in mind, because that might be one of those areas where they want to be stricter than Europe. More detailed requirements for software. As I mentioned, similar to Europe, they are considering the IMDRF guidance. More stringent requirements for implantable devices, similar to the EU, but implant card information is said to be expected in both physical and digital format, which is a little bit of an additional requirement over Europe. All manufacturers, including Class 1 custom-made IVD health institutions, will be required to have appropriate QMS in place, which will be largely aligned with Europe. Enhanced traceability transparency requirements, including the UDI, registrations, SSCP, PSUR, etc. These are largely aligned to Europe, but using specific MHRA databases, which will require separate registration. So obviously, UDOMED registrations and all these work products in UDOMED will not help for UK. They will have their own databases. Excuse me. Remanufacturing of single-use devices will be regulated, not the same as reprocessing. So there will be some alignment, but there might be some different definitions over what is reprocessing, what is remanufacturing, and Class 1 devices will be explicitly excluded in the UK. Approved bodies and designated standards are kind of synonymous to or analog to notified bodies and harmonized standards in Europe. Manufacturer of Class 3 or 2B custom-made devices will require to have certified QMS. The EU is less stringent. The approved QMS is only required for Class 3 implantable devices. As we previously discussed, there's going to be an approval path for innovation, which is missing in the EU, and the domestic assurance route, which is also missing in the EU. Just very quickly, there's the number of approved bodies is growing. SGS is one of the few that still have full scope. And it's worth to point out that you only see that there's only a handful of UK approved bodies, whereas there's already 39 notified bodies. So if you should, when you are with some other notified body, you should make sure that your notified body or your company will be able to support your UK certification needs in the future. Obviously, the SGS is working very closely with the MHRA, so for the time being, you can definitely rest assured that the SGS is going to be one of the bodies that can support you. And so, against all this backdrop of and information and current developments, what can the manufacturers do, or the different stakeholders do? Let's start with the government. The MHRA is planning to ramp up their connections, as we previously discussed, with the UK conformity assessment bodies, with the IMDRF and with different trade associations. And of course, you can see here is largely the MDSEP countries plus Switzerland. They will need to avoid certain pitfalls. Of course, the UK, even just by itself, the UK medical device regulations has to work within the larger framework of the UK legislation. And some of those, there are some, even that imposes some constraints on them. For example, their sustainability targets. So they have to make sure that, because, for example, in Europe, the MDR slowed down the innovation. So that means that some older devices have to be used longer than necessary in the EU market, simply because the replacement devices are not approved or not CE marked under the MDR yet. And so that means that certain devices may use too much resources, energy, or whatever else, consumables, and maybe the next generation of the devices would work better with sustainability targets, also supporting, the product life cycle, recycling, etc. And maybe these older products do not support that. So when the UK government is working on their revised MDR, they have to make sure that the new regulation supports and plays into their sustainability initiatives. They have to consider the regulatory practices in isolation, or that is actually something that they have to avoid. So they should not only look at their own regulation, but in collaboration with the other international bodies, they will want to make sure that their legislation, regulatory framework is as compatible with the other countries' frameworks as possible. And they should avoid neglecting full consideration of timelines. So obviously, any deviation from the timelines can have a negative impact on the availability of medical solutions for the patient population in the UK, or can have other negative, like economic effects or some other types of effects. So they have to make sure that they align the resources and that they manage these transition periods appropriately. They also need to look for opportunities for integration of regulatory processes from innovation to patient. They are, of course, striving to have a less burdensome UK patient access, and they look for innovation. So again, if your device is one of those, probably you will have a little bit easier time getting into the UK as to the EU. So also this was a message from one of the trade shows that I visited last week, that was about reimbursement and getting products to the markets. And the consensus from some of the speakers was that the UK currently can, in certain cases, be considered as a gateway to Europe. Of course, we don't have any commitments from the EU that the UKCA marking, for example, or any UK-approved products would have a easier pathway to the EU. But just generally speaking, the UK population is not negligible. So if you look at Europe to be 350 to 400 million people, the UK is, I think my information was like 65 million people of this. So it's not an insignificant part. And so if you have a much easier regulatory pathway in this one country, you may still want to consider, even if you deprioritize Europe for the time being. As for the manufacturers, of course, a question is about your generic regulatory strategy. And so you can decide to just wait and see what happens. The timelines suggest that you have a little bit of leeway, and maybe the amount of changes also suggests that you should just wait if it's not super urgent for you. So waiting and just seeing what happens is a cheap way. If UK is not a key market, but it's potentially risky, you can miss out on some opportunities, or you may not be in a position to swiftly adapt to the situation if you haven't done your groundwork. You can be an early adopter for the current UKCA. It is kind of an assurance with premium price and some unknowns. So I will talk about this a little bit more in the next slide. Or you can actively plan for a new regulation. So in that case, you will need to monitor where the UK government is going, and you may also you may already want to set that as the target and make your products compliant to this UKCA 2.0, if you will. So that may also be a target if that's more suitable for your products and your organization. It's not very costly and demanding now, but it will require swift action later. So when the time will come, you will need to quickly jump and maybe even need to make changes. If you are already planning ahead and based on the information that is available now, as those things will be refined and maybe finalized and even changed, you may need to make some last minute adjustments. So you want to, especially if you have a broader product group and you want to make bulk changes to all of these documentations, then you may want to consider balancing that so that you don't have to make too many changes in the last minute. As for the UKCA certification in particular, our pattern seems to be really clear. So if you have a new UK exclusive product, it would be very easy to recommend that you just apply for UKCA. You don't really have another pathway yet, unless that product is approved by another regulator somewhere else, like you have a 510K or something like that. But again, some of these things in the UK are still on in consultation phase. So at the moment, only the UKCA mark is the only thing that's rolled out. So for those cases, you probably don't have too much choice than just to apply for UKCA marking. If you have an existing MDD certified product, then probably it would be a good idea to apply for UKCA because it's relatively an easier transition, especially if your UKCA approved body offers an easy abbreviated transition from MDD, which, for example, SGS does. If you have a current or new MDR only product, so if your technical documentation of your product is only compliant with the EU MDR, then maybe it is better to wait for the updated MDR rather than to build essentially an MDD compliant technical documentation as well, just for this limited time, because maybe the current MDR will only be in place for the next couple of years. So building a full technical documentation for that, even if it's just an administrative exercise, it might be a big investment. So in that case, depending on how much business success you expect in the UK market, you might be better off waiting. But if you feel that is justified by the amount of business that you would drive there, then maybe it's already a good idea. So maybe these would be the high-level scenarios. In general, things to keep our eyes on are labeling changes and labeling overall, the development in approved bodies and capacities, and any political changes. So just like Brexit came out of nowhere, there might be another turning tide. I don't know, maybe in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, maybe the UK government will turn back and they will say that they want to join the EU again. I don't know. I'm just putting something out there. So anyway, the situation is quite turbulent and volatile. So you definitely want to keep an eye on the political changes. There might be some diverging interpretations between the UK and any other regulator. So, of course, every regulator wants to push themselves to be synchronized and harmonized to the other bodies, but there can always be differences. At one point, for example, the UK, I remember the MHRA challenged manufacturers whose products were only reducing pain because they said that that's not in the scope of the medical device definition. If it doesn't treat the underlying condition that causes the pain, then just simply pain killing is not alleviating the disease. And therefore, some of these device applications have been pushed back in the past when the UK was part of the EU. So even then, they had their own interpretation. And of course, international recognition, I can only imagine that this would be beneficial. Like any global harmonization would be beneficial for the medical device industry. So we are really eagerly waiting that. And I think that's on my side. Greg, do you want to talk about trainings from SGS?
Sure. So this is Greg, and I work with Balazs. And we do offer trainings that we could sign up for in SGS Academy. There are links to this, which will be in the presentation that we're going to send you, or we can go right on the website and have a look at them. If anyone has any questions about any of these medical device trainings, we're happy to discuss it with you. Blaj, if you're done, there's a number of questions in the chat as well.
Yes, I was just reading while you were talking about the training. So first question, could you please elaborate on the situation with UK and their desire to be full member of MDSEP? Did you say this had been voted down by other MDSEP members? If yes, when did this happen? Is there any chance in the future UK might be an MDSEP full member? So yes, I was on the MDSEP forum at the previous company that I worked with. I was their global MDSEP program manager. And so we visited and met with the MDSEP RAC twice a year. In the time period, especially when MDSEP was built up between 2016 and 2021, when I was with the previous company. And for a while there was, and if you look at an MDSEP audit report, you will see that it actually supports European certification schemes. So the MDSEP RAC's desire was that they wanted Europe as the sixth jurisdiction, and to have the MDSEP report be used as notified body reports as well, because then you could truly cover all different major certification schemes with just one report and one audit. So that would definitely be desirable. And I have consulted them personally. I worked with the author of the MDSEP audit report to find out all the smaller details of what makes it compliant with the the notified body audit report requirements, and we worked painstakingly, and we got great support from the MHRA and the Ireland or the Irish competent authority at the time. But in particular, there was a person, his name is Dr. Edelheiser. He's a very dominant voice in the European committee and Team MB and a bunch of other expert panels. And his position was, and not because he's a bad guy or anything like that, but from his position, his perspective was that the MDSEP audit model is inferior to the general requirement of notified body auditing work, and therefore he did not support that the MDSEP report should be used for notified body purposes. And basically, because of the transition, there was collaboration, direct collaboration between the MDSEP Regulatory Authority Council and a delegation from Europe. So that bridge, I think, is still there. It's just that the whole synchronization process between the EU and MDSEP has been deprioritized because of the MDR transition really took top priority. And so all the resources have been moved there. And I wouldn't say that it was forever shelved, but it was definitely deprioritized. And I think the UK government wanted to treat it as a higher priority. They wanted to see this through. And now that they are alone, hopefully that there will be something coming out of this. Probably you will hear more about this after this year's MDSEP forum is actually just happening. So I think maybe they are discussing it as we speak. Okay, obviously we are going to give you guys update when we hear anything more. The next one, horizon scanning, especially for other regulatory frameworks. Do you see UK going the same path in Switzerland, accepting devices with US FDA health conduct clearances instead of CE or UKCA? I would not say instead. I would say that they want to keep their options open, and they say that if a regulator can prove that their regulatory framework and market access process is equally robust as the European one, or as the one that UK would have generated for themselves, then I think they are going to accept that. I surely heard that they are working with Australia. They are working with a bunch of other bodies. UK or the US FDA is explicitly mentioned. I think generally speaking, they will accept everyone from the MDSEP countries. At least that's the point, plus the Swissmed or Swissmedic. So I think the leading developed country regulators authorizations will be, or that's the plan, that it will be accepted in the UK in the future. Next question, is continued and long-term recognition of CE marking under MDR likely as part of recognizing and reliance? Yeah, I don't think they want to do away with this. They just don't want to be reliant on the CE marking. So I don't think that there will ever be a time when the CE marking will not be accepted. Again, I think the current timeline is 2030, but I'm not sure that it will not be extended. We will see. I think it will also largely depend on how well the UK market will be saturated and supplied with medical devices. If they see that the absence of certain European manufacturers will be a hindrance, then maybe that will be a problem. But maybe by synchronizing their MDR to the European MDR, European manufacturers will have such an easy time getting a UKCA approval because the technical documentation, the QMS requirements are aligned. Maybe this will be a non-issue. So I can easily see that as well. Next question. Do we know if the UK PMS will apply just to Great Britain countries with Northern Ireland remaining fully aligned with the EU MDR, or could Northern Ireland have dual requirements? Yeah, Northern Ireland is always special. And I think the situation there is also very volatile. I've seen already complaints from different stakeholders that it seemed like that Northern Ireland and their special regulations, despite of how small that country is, their regulations might be able to be exploited by manufacturers of bypassing certain customs situations where you can use Northern Ireland to basically just bypass this customs agreement between the EU and the United Kingdom, because it seems like Northern Ireland will have somehow the best of both worlds, but you can put also UKCA marked products and CE marked products, and then you will have free movement with both jurisdictions, so both the EU and both the UK. So it seems like that Northern Ireland can theoretically be either through explicit regulations or through the lack of enforcement, you can kind of exploit this and put CE marked products in the UK or put UKCA marked products in the EU. One way or another. So the legal situation there is a little bit murky. Probably we will need some follow-up and further clarification from the regulators going forward. Next question was UK clinical evidence. Could they align the currently draft ISO 18969 which speak to the clinical evaluation report? I'm not familiar with that standard, to be perfectly honest, so I cannot answer this. This is something that we will need to circle back to you on. I have no information about this. Next one. Do we know if UK UDI format database will align closer with the existing NHS system or likely be MHRA specific, and does 2 systems in GB countries and 3 systems in EU, taking Northern Ireland into account? It's a good question. I don't think we know anything about this. So as I showed you in one of the slides, the UDI will be part of one of the stages. Either I think it will be a part 2 of the UK MDR update. So we will see the details when that comes out. We will give you an update when we know more. Next question, if we have a current EU MDR certification, recently received UKCA certification based on our EU MDR certificate, okay, how should technical files be maintained? Is it appropriate to just maintain the MDR tech file, or should we also keep past MDD tech file up to date as well? I would not say that you should update or keep the MDD tech, at least in this context. Maybe for other reasons, you want to maintain the technical file, but in this context, you should not just update the MDD technical file, you should actively work on always updating it to meet the UK MDR requirements. So eventually, through updates, I would imagine that it's going to deviate from the original MDD requirement more and more. But if that's the pathway that you choose, then you have to make it UK MDR compliant, and that will have some deviation from the MDD. So for sure, you need to maintain it. You should not abandon it just for MDR, because, I mean, again, what can I say? You have seen the infographics. The EU MDR-based CE marking will only be accepted until 2030. So if you are abandoning your MDD technical file, and you are only maintaining the MDR technical file, then depending on what the UK government will come up with the new MDR regulation, you may find that you will need to do a lot of rework. In some other cases, you may see that it's fine, and the new UK MDR regulation is so close to the EU MDR, that's your best basis for building technical documentation for these two purposes. So that's also fine. I only have two more questions. Actually, I have a couple of more questions. I think we will need to circle back to you guys if you need to go, because I see a bunch of questions are coming up. We have your contact information, and then we will address these questions in emails, okay, or we'll try to set up calls with you to clarify these questions, okay, for everyone that we didn't have enough time. I really enjoyed all the very good questions, deep and meaningful questions, and we are going to circle back to everyone whose question we didn't have time to answer. All right, thank you everyone for your participation.